Look, there is no doubt in the minds of the clubs that are concerned about this move that this could massively impact on that hearing in November over the 115 charges. But what's really interesting about it, Joe, from my perspective, is the fact that it has absolutely split the Premier League.
Hello and welcome to Stretford Paddock. This is a one-on-one interview and we are joined by Chief Sports Correspondent at The Times, Matt Lawton, is here on the channel. First of all, thank you very much for coming on and very good to meet you, Matt. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you, Joe. Yeah, it's been a busy week, but all is well.
I'm sure it has been a very busy week with the Manchester City stuff that was going on yesterday. That sort of massive news that broke. We'll be getting into that and how that affects United and the rest of the Premier League because, you know, these sorts of things do tend to. But we'll start a little bit with Manchester United, of course. We're in a weird limbo at the minute as United fans where we know that a decision sort of hasn't been made officially, but we expect one, and it really seemingly could go either way with Erik ten Hag as the Manchester United manager. What's your understanding of that situation and at least when we can potentially expect to hear something concrete? Because it's getting a little bit ridiculous at this point, isn't it?
Yeah, look, I don't think it's entirely ridiculous because I do think if we just assume for a second, and I'm not saying this is what's going to happen, but if we assume for a second that they are planning to change the manager, then it would have looked pretty crass to have done it when Ten Hag had gone on holiday. So I think it's only right that they, if they are going to conduct this review, that they wait for him to get back. People haven't been around, and at the same time, you know, you probably read yesterday maybe that they've got a new head of comms at Manchester United. He only started today, Toby Craig. So my understanding is there won't be anything today. But I wouldn't be surprised if we do get some kind of update in the next couple of days about it. I would be reluctant to even put a fiver on which way it's going to go. I think a lot of us, and I know some of my colleagues, basically reported that he was going to be sacked in the sort of 48 hours before the cup final. I don't think anyone, and I hope I don't offend Man United fans here, but I don't think anyone really thought that they would win at Wembley. I think there was a real fear that City would wipe the floor with them, and actually they played brilliantly and deservedly won the FA Cup. So look, that might have caused the wobble, but as I say, the only thing I'm fairly confident of sitting here right now is that I think we'll have some news by the end of the week.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully we get something. It did seem like all the talk was either neutral, no one's saying anything, no one's, you know, giving anything away, or certain people were sticking their head up and saying he's going to go. I didn't see anyone leading up to the FA Cup final saying, actually, we've heard he's going to stay. It was either we're not commenting or, like you said, a couple of people going, he's gone regardless. Like it did seem
the Guardian wrote.
Yeah,
the Guardian wrote that he was going to be sacked, didn't they? And it was going to happen immediately, and it hasn't happened. So yeah, I think what was telling and what has been telling for me, Joe, is and talking to people at the club, you know, over the last couple of months, I guess, is the lack of public endorsement by Jim Ratcliffe at any point really about Ten Hag. You know, when he had the breakfast meeting with the journalists in London, I wasn't actually invited to that, but it's another story. But there was no kind of move to say we think this guy's great and we're going to get behind him, and I think certainly people within Old Trafford and Carrington felt that was a bad sign. But as I say, you know, I don't think I'm the only person far from the only person who thinks that what Ten Hag did at Wembley the other week was pretty impressive. You know, the way he set up the team, the way the team played, and I guess there's still, I guess we'll get onto this in a second, but, you know, when you look at what the people that are available, are they confident that a change also equates to an upgrade? So it's a really interesting situation, isn't it? It's not an easy decision to make, and complicated by the fact that the bloke who would probably make it is currently on gardening leave and hasn't been released by Newcastle yet.
Yeah, that doesn't help. Although, by the sounds of the rumours, he may have already been sort of sending an email here or there in his new role.
Yeah.
But Just on that then, so obviously the decision itself is unknown. We await that decision, whatever it may be, one way or the other, and hopefully that will either be accompanied by an announcement of him sacking, obviously they'd have to announce that, or maybe some suggestion and announcement that he's going to be here for next season, potentially even a contract extension to really give him a show of support. But just from the sort of political side of this decision then, do you think it's sort of putting Ten Hag, let's say he does stay, it's been a week and a half since the FA Cup final. Do you think that it's making him look, or 2 weeks and a half, sorry, since the FA Cup final, do you think that it's starting to make him look like INEOS clearly don't fancy him that much, because if they did, they'd have stuck with him? And let's say they sack him and bring in, I don't know, De Zerbi, it doesn't look like they fancy him that much because they've waited 2 weeks to hire him. It's from the outside anyway. Yeah. It feels to me as though their lack of decision is showing a clear lack of care or lack of huge interest in either option. Is that a bit of a concern, do you think?
Yeah. Well, look, on your first point, again, instincts say that the fact that they didn't come out at the start of last week and say, just to clear up any speculation here, Erik Ten Hag will be in charge of Manchester United at the start of next season. They didn't do that. They could have done that. Him being on holiday, they could have done that while he was sitting by the pool. You know what I mean? So, I personally think the delay is only because he planned to go on holiday immediately after the cup final, and has been away. And I think, even I think back to the car crash that was the exit of David Moyes, where, I spoke to David Moyes on that Easter Monday because I'd known him a long time, and I'd known him from his Preston days. And I rang him because the story had broken on a number of newspaper websites that he was going to be sacked. And he didn't know anything about it. But the fact of the matter is, it still didn't happen. And I know the regime has changed, and this was Ed Woodward's time. But he still didn't actually get sacked until he went into Carrington the next day and he had the meeting with Ed Woodward. You have to do it face to face, right? If you're going to sack somebody, I know people do get fired on the internet these days. People get dumped in text messages, and the world has changed, But I think United, there's been a few occasions, hasn't there? Moyes being the best example, where they don't do it right. And I think if you are going to get rid of someone, you've got to wait for them to get back. Haven't actually seen him around because I live in that part of the world, and I haven't seen him around. Sometimes I see him in coming out of Marks and Spencer's, whatever. I don't know if he is actually back.
Maybe he's still, but that's a great plan by Ten Hag. You can't sack me if I'm not in the country. He's left as soon as the FA Cup got on the bus. He went to an aeroplane and has not been back in England since. You can't sack him.
I might try that for the next 10 years, just not go in the office.
It's perfect.
You can't fire me because I'm not coming in.
Yeah, you can't ghost a manager. You can't just not let him. You have to do it face to face. If there's never face to face, they can't do it. Let's talk a little bit about Manchester City then, because obviously you were a huge part of this article yesterday. This exclusive coming out of the Times, and I'm sure, I don't know who worked on it with you and how that goal came to be, but you were, brought us that article of Manchester City are essentially fighting back with their own lawsuit against the Premier League, where I'd like you to sort of define a couple of bits of it for me, but my understanding is they have said that this is sort of separate-ish to the 115 charges, but they are saying that this whole thing about clubs paying their own teams elevated fees for sponsorships, the rules around that are crooked and dodgy and potentially even sort of discriminatory to different parts of the world. Can you give us the sort of brief overview of that before we dive into some of the details? Yeah.
First of all, now I worked on that entirely on my own, obviously with my editors and lawyers and everybody. It's in terms of the delivery of a story, it's a team effort. But no, it was something that came into me quite a few weeks ago, and has taken some time to pull together. In terms of what it means, look, you kind of explained it. There have actually been for a long time rules around sponsorship agreements involving related parties. So, for instance, a company that has a clear connection to the owner of a football club, and it has always been, the case that, well, certainly you can go back to 10 years ago at least, there was always a line in the Premier League rules that talked about fair market value. But in the wake of the City revelations back in whenever it was, 2019, and then the takeover at Newcastle, there was a move by the Premier League, sort of late 2021, that they needed to tighten this up and have some proper regulation around it, and actually use an independent agency, an independent company, to assess what the value of any deal should be, so that you can't get a situation where an airline that is the national airline in a country that essentially owns a football club, and just decide that a stadium rights naming deal or a shirt deal is worth £2 billion a year, because obviously one, that's going to completely eradicate any concerns around financial fair play regulation, but is just going to distort the sort of competitive model of the Premier League to such an extent that no one will be able to live with the club that's got those kind of resources. So that's why it was brought in. But City are arguing against it, and they're arguing that those rules are unlawful, that basically, a bit like, when we talk about the housing market, we say a house is worth what someone's prepared to pay for it. Well, if someone's prepared to pay £1 billion to stick their name on Man City shirts, then who are we to say that's not the value of sticking your company name on Man City shirts? That's the argument, and that is what will be sort of argued in this arbitration in the next couple of weeks. But what's really interesting about it, Joe, from my perspective, is the fact that it has absolutely split the Premier League. Well, I say it's split the Premier League. There's a minority on one side that are siding with City on this. There's one club in particular that has submitted a witness statement supporting City's position, and then there's 10 or 12 on the other side who are prepared to either appear as witnesses or have submitted evidence and letters of support saying no, the system is correct and lawful, and we've got to protect it, because otherwise, we might as well all give up.
And presumably you are unable to share which side of that argument Manchester United are on, I would assume.
I don't know for certain, but I'm pretty sure they're on the side of the majority.
Okay. So just on this then, because obviously Man City are in this absolute bizarre situation where they've got this ongoing lawsuit. Is it even a lawsuit? I don't know the exact term for it, but these ongoing charges that we've seen from the Premier League that have been rumbling along for almost 7 or 8 years now, for that first sort of set of charges that we saw that got overturned or partially overturned by the Court of Arbitration for Sport, and then these second charges that sort of have a lot of Venn diagram crossover with the first ones but are now being done by the Premier League. Is this a sort of all part of that? Is this a political play by them to try to get a bit of leverage over the Premier League to maybe hopefully influence what will happen with the charges? Or is this even potentially them saying, right, well, we can get the rules changed from now, so all the deals we've done, because those charges only go up to around 2021, don't they? I think the 115 charges, or somewhere around that period. Is this them trying to get the next set? What's going on here?
Yeah, well, what is going on here? It's a good question. Look, there is no doubt in the minds of the clubs that are concerned about this move that this could massively impact on that hearing in November over the 115 charges. Because as we know, it's all in public domain, an awful lot of this is around sponsorship agreements with companies related to Abu Dhabi. So if suddenly rules around that are unlawful, and as I said to you a minute ago, there were other rules in place. It was within, there weren't specific rules, but within their accountancy standards in the Premier League, long before 2021, when they actually updated these regulations, there was that phrase around these sponsorship deals being a fair market value, and at that point it was up to the board, the Premier League board, to determine that. Obviously, they would have sought expert advice, but the fact is, you can assess fair market value to the extent that you can look at what other clubs have, secured, what they've got for their shirt sponsorship or their stadium rights sponsorship. I remember I remember being the United correspondent when all those years ago United did the Vodafone deal, and I think it was 30 million quid. I can't remember if it was over 1 year or a number of years, but it was a staggering amount of money. But it wasn't so far. It was reflective of United's success at the time, but it wasn't so far off the scale that anyone thought, well, that's ridiculous, because of course, why would Vodafone, there's no link between Vodafone and Manchester United other than the fact that Vodafone wanted their name on the Man United shirt with this team that was conquering all, So it's that's got to be one motivation, right? It's got to be it's got to be a situation, if City are successful and this independent tribunal rules that these rules are unlawful, it's got to have a knock-on effect on the 115. But at the same time, it's within that City claim that I quoted, you have got complaints by City that they don't have certain advantages that clubs with richer sporting histories, and they actually cite United. It's easier for United, they're arguing, to go and get a big sponsorship deal because they're Manchester United, and as we know from when the club was put up for sale, that their bankers were claiming 1 billion fans globally. It's certainly a lot. We all know that. So United is one of the biggest brands in the world, and City just across the way are claiming that they're at a disadvantage because they don't have that history.
I mean, but isn't that's what football is, though, isn't it? That's like saying, oh, it's so annoying we got relegated because we didn't get as many points as the champions. We should have a Premier League title as well. Well, you didn't, why should 100 years or certainly 70, 80 years of history and trophies and success be equaled and surpassed by a little bit of luck 15 years ago? That to me makes sense. That's what sport is. It's organic competition that grows, success in an unfair way.
Yeah, look, there are certainly flaws in their argument. One that we highlighted yesterday was the fact that they also complain that London clubs can charge more for tickets, and actually the clubs that disagree with what City are doing have done the calculations. They've looked at the average ticket prices at City and compared them to the 7 Premier League clubs in London, and actually City are ranked 3rd in how much they charge. So the idea that the whole of all the London clubs are at an unfair advantage because it's London and everyone's got more money down there, I'm not sure that's true. I think it's so expensive to live down there. I'm not sure how much of disposable income the average person who lives in the south has got these days. But yeah, there's lots of arguments and counter arguments, but ultimately what we're looking at here, I think, and what a lot of people have written about this since we broke the story yesterday, and it's a legitimate concern, is the impact it can have on the Premier League. The Premier League is brilliant, right? It's I've talked about this and written about this. It's so successful that it's actually striking fear into the major American sports. A couple of years ago, the Premier League, they went and stuck their flag in the sand in Manhattan, where all the major American sports are based. All their head offices are there, and they are genuinely concerned that this league in England. There's now 40 million Americans watching Premier League football during the course of a season on NBC, and it's one of the reasons it's so successful is because it's competitive. And I know the counter argument to that is the fact that we have a team that's currently won it 4 on the bounce. And also of concern, I think, is the fact that, I was saying this to someone earlier, that, we remember when United won the title and, when they were in those great season-long duels with Arsenal, and you would win the title with high 70s, 80 points. But now we've got a situation where teams like Liverpool and Arsenal are getting as much as 90 points and they're not winning the title because there's this other team that is just barely drops the ball, over the course of a season, and it is hard. But the worry here is that it will become even harder, and actually these state-owned clubs will just have so much income that forget it. We were worried. We were worried when Abramovich bought Chelsea that it had changed the landscape with the amount of money he had available, and it did eclipse. Their wealth did eclipse what United had relied on, self-generated. Let's be fair. United's wealth, particularly when Fergie was winning the treble, was generated by a phenomenally successful PLC. And they had more money because they generated more money because they were such a successful business. This is the whole point about sporting histories and global brands and a big stadium I say I was covering United at the time, and I just remember what an absolute success story that club was at that time. But this is the wealth of these guys is just. It's almost incomprehensible. You look at the wealth in Saudi Arabia, just the money that is generated by Aramco. You can add up the money generated by Google, Yahoo, Apple, Elon Musk, the whole lot, and it won't add up to what the revenues generated by Saudi oil. They are richer than everybody else. Yeah, by some distance.
It's a crazy situation that football is in at the minute like this. It's a sort of quite an existential issue, this, and it could be the sort of beginning of teams fighting against the league itself, and what does that mean for the league? Like I said, it's massive, really. And I think City tend to do this, don't they? Remember when they would boo the Champions League anthem, and then now they hate the Premier League. Whoever they all go up against, or all the competitions they're in, they find a way to fall out with them and be right. Just either they're breaking the law, or they're just on the line of breaking the law, and not breaking. Like they've played their game purposely to be as close to breaking the law as you can without breaking it, they would say. And obviously the Premier League and at one point UEFA would differ. That's their whole line, isn't it? That's their whole strategy. I wanted, you mentioned before about reporting on the treble, and I want to talk about that in just a minute.
Can I just distance myself from breaking? That's your opinion.
That was my opinion on Manchester City's strategy. Yeah. Yes, that was.
Yeah, I think you mean you're talking about regulation. You're not talking
breaking
about
the rules, not the law. The laws of the game.
But
just to. Absolutely.
The lawyers will be watching, Joe. So look, it's I'm quite, I live in Manchester, and I'm not a fan of either team. I have very fond memories of covering United. And being one of the reporters that would see Fergie every Friday, they are some of the best times in my career. It was a privilege. It could be quite lively at times, as people know, and quite unpleasant at times. But it was a privilege to go and be in that position where you'd go and see him every Friday, and being at covering the team at that time, travelling with the team at that time. We used to be on the same plane. It was amazing. But I also have a lot of admiration for a lot of people at City, and I have a lot of admiration for the football they play, and for the coach that Pep Guardiola is, and for the ability that De Bruyne and Foden and Haaland have. I like watching the way they play their football, but they all signed up to a rule book. And the one thing people will know about me as a journalist, if they've ever read my work, whether it's about doping or any kind of, fair play issues in sport, I believe in it, and I that's why I pursue drug cheats, and it's why I feel strongly that if there are rules in place, they have to be abided by. And if in November that hearing concludes with City having cheated, essentially, then they should throw the book at them.
You mentioned there about doping, and obviously you've reported on INEOS and the sort of things that have gone on there over the last few years. One thing that I think people aren't really speaking about with INEOS, particularly in terms of their ownership of United, is there has been suggestions and hints, and there were things written about them potentially looking for loopholes in terms of different substances being used. And obviously I'm watching my language here, but this was something that did take place. I think, was it Team INEOS at that point, or was it still Team Sky? I don't remember. But there was a lot of questions around their integrity in their cycling world. Do you think that's something that they have learned from? Do you think that's something that they will bring to Manchester United in terms of, looking for ways to get the maximum out of their athletes whilst not, obviously crossing that line? Do you think that's something that we should be either excited by or worried about as United fans of, we've seen what's happened with City and all the ways they've gone about things in the Premier League, think they've broken the rules, and we'll see if they have. Should we be worried about INEOS doing similar things at Manchester United, do you think?
Look, we do have to be careful what we say here. We're obviously talking about the presence of Dave Brailsford. I don't think for one second that there's suddenly going to be this sophisticated doping program at Manchester United. They're not that stupid, and I don't think that's ever what they were about at Team Sky. It was Team Sky and British Cycling, but there were issues, and they have one of their doctors. There was a situation, very high-profile case with one of their doctors with the delivery of banned drugs arriving at the National Cycling Centre, which was also the headquarters for Team Sky at the time in Manchester. And the doctor has been struck off. And this was a guy who was the doctor for not just Team Sky, but the British Olympic team as recently as 2016 in the Rio Olympics. And he's been struck off and also was issued with a doping ban because this stuff was ordered, and then he tried to cover up the fact that it had been ordered. And to this day, we don't know who it was for. Dave Brailsford was not directly implicated in that. There were also, and I was very much in the middle of this story, there were also concerns around their use of medical exemptions. And this is a big issue, particularly in sort of endurance sport, performance sport, around the ethics around allowing athletes access to certain medicines for questionable reasons. And the fact of the matter is there was a lot of scepticism around the use of a drug that was given to Bradley Wiggins before he won the Tour de France to treat certain illnesses, when the view of a lot of medical experts was that it just wasn't necessary. And it was a Russian hacking group, the Fancy Bears, who exposed these medical certificates. And it did damage Sky's reputation and Bradley's reputation and everyone's reputation, really. But no, I don't think for one second that suddenly there's some dark stuff going on down at Carrington. No, I don't think that's the case. I would like to think that Dave has, they've learned from that, and certain things weren't handled well, maybe that's a bit naive from me, but you try and see, you do try and base all your opinions on evidence, I think that's not the role that Dave Brailsford has with INEOS and teams and Manchester United anyway. Not to, look, let's just also say there's no doubt doping exists in football. Of course it does. It would, given the money involved in professional football, the idea that a club may choose to cut corners to get a £90 million footballer back on the pitch quickly because we know that certain banned substances will accelerate recovery from injury. The idea that couldn't come into play with an unethical doctor or an unethical coach or an unethical player. It would be naive to think that football is clean. But no, I would like to think that Jim Ratcliffe wouldn't be encouraging that kind of thing down at United.
I hope so. I do certainly hope so. You mentioned before about the 99 treble and working with, working sort of in front of Sir Alex Ferguson and what that could be like at times. Obviously, now we see the last decade of United, which is on the pitch at least a sort of a pale comparison of what we saw while Sir Alex was there, certainly from that 99 season. What was it like around the club at that time. How did that feel compared to what you hear and what you see of Manchester United now? Does there seem to be massive changes above and behind the players that are clear why we aren't as successful as we used to be? And sort of in particular with Sir Alex, what was it like when he's, going off and banning people and screaming at people? Was that quite exciting? Was it fun, or did you just think, why are you being such an arse? What was that like?
It was mostly exciting. It was sometimes intimidating, I won't lie. I think I'm pretty robust, and as I say, people that know me will know that I'm, I will happily knock on the door of a criminal, child sex offender. Nothing really scares me. But as a younger man, dealing with Fergie at times could be quite, it could be slightly chastening. But I've got to say, and I don't think he was my biggest fan at times, not least because I at that time, for a chunk of that time, I wrote for the Express, which was his paper. So I always remember the first time I ever, my first game, European game, I should say, my first game as the Manchester Correspondent was a cup tie at Barnsley, and they lost. And I used quite a tired phrase in my match report, and I wouldn't use it now. But I'd said that United were outfought and outthought. Bit of a cliche, really, if I'm honest. And thought nothing more of it. It was like buried in a match report, right? And then I went to Monaco for the Champions League quarter-final. So this is 98. And I've just become the Manchester Correspondent, and there's a press conference in Monaco, and Gary Neville's on the stage, and I think, right, here's an opportunity to go and quickly say hello to Gary Neville, obviously an influential player, and I'll just quickly, at the end of the press conference, as he's walking off the stage, I'll quickly say hello. So I go up to Gary and I say, "Hey Gary, my name's Matt Lawton. I've just become the new Manchester Correspondent for the Express." Blah, blah, blah. And he's like, "Gary, big Gary," goes, "Oh, hi Matt, how you doing?" Sort of thing, blah, blah, blah. And then suddenly, I've just got this explosion next to me as Fergie just goes, "Outfought and outthought.
Oh,
what a load of shit. You've made a good start." And if that wasn't designed to intimidate me from day one, then nothing else was. And I remember Gary laughing and basically looking at me and basically saying, "Welcome to United." And it sort of went from, and I'd already had a horrendous day because that morning I'd got to Manchester Airport, because I say we used to fly with the team. And as well as a nice welcome from Fergie later that day, I got a nice welcome from the more seasoned Manchester troops, because I walked to W.H. Smith's at Manchester Airport and grabbed all the papers. And on the back of every paper except the Daily Express, certainly on the back of every tabloid except the Daily Express, was the fact that Ryan Giggs was out of the quarter-final. So it was a splash in every paper. So I'm the new Manchester Correspondent. We haven't got the story. So I was like, "Well, that's a great start. Thanks for that, guys. Welcome to the new kid. Let's give him a slap round the face, and this is, you're in the big league now, son, and you're going to get, we're not going to make it easy for you." So that was good. And the thing is, those days, and I know exactly how that had come about, because amazingly in those days, Fergie would take a call every day. You could ring him. Wow. And he would take a call, and one of the guys would be kind of volunteered to ring him. And they used to do that, and I just assumed that one of the guys, long since retired now, but would have maybe been a guy called Peter Fitton who worked for the Sun, or Bill Thornton who worked for the Daily Star, who Fergie liked, and they were good guys. Don't get me wrong. That was part of my rite of passage, getting that sort of punch in the face on the first day in the office, as it were. But anyway, so they would ring, and I assume he said on the day before, "By the way, Giggsy's got a hamstring. He's not coming. He won't be on the plane." So they were all very happy they've got that story, and I'm sure they had a chat and said, "Oh, should we give it to the new kid at the Express?" They were like, "No, stuff him, he's going to have to learn the hard way." Anyway, so I can't remember how, but probably from a colleague at the Express, acquired Fergie's number. And I thought, well, if they're not going to share it, I have to start ringing him at home, I didn't know he had an afternoon nap.
Oh, no. You've not interrupted his nap.
I interrupted his afternoon nap. So that was the second bollocking I got. It was great. It was a great start. But no, it was, look, as I say, I've no idea what he thinks of me, but if I ever did get the chance to tell him, I would say to him that, look, and I did write stories that he didn't necessarily like all the time. I wrote about, his son getting £1 million in the Amsterdam deal to Lazio when I was at the Telegraph, and I'm sure that was, wasn't his favourite day reading the newspaper, but it was true, and the club confirmed it. I look back on those days as great days. What was so different about it to the way it is now, and this is not to say it's a bad thing now, but in those days it really was 5, 6, 7 reporters from the Nationals, maybe 1 or 2 freelancers that used to go. There was a chap who I always remember. He actually, Carrington had just opened, and when Carrington first opened, the barrier wasn't there. It was still quite, it was all new, and they hadn't put the barrier across the thing. He just didn't see it. He was driving in, he just didn't see it, and smashed through the barrier. So, and I remember this argument. They were going, you'd have to pay for that. And he's like, well, I didn't know it was there. When did you put that there? Because the sun was in his eyes, and So some mad stuff. But no, what's different now is it's now TV cameras, and I must admit, I haven't been to a United manager's press conference for years, but I was still going when I was football correspondent up to. I was football correspondent at the Mail for 11 years, so up to 2012, 2013, I would still go to the occasional one. So I don't think I've actually been to a Manchester United manager's press conference since Fergie. So, but no, they were amazing. Like, sometimes he could be absolutely brilliant. Sometimes he could be foul, grumpy, abusive. But you always knew you were in the company of someone quite special. And I look back on my career, and there are certain people you meet that have that kind of X factor, that box office presence, and he was definitely one of them. Amazing to deal with at times, and utterly, as I say, utterly unplayable at times. Yeah. I was out in the cold with him for a while, and it was a Champions League press conference. I can't remember what the question was, but I asked him a question, and to the utter delight of all my colleagues, he said it would take an entire interview to answer that question, and it's an interview you're never going to get. Even I laughed at that. That is good. It was a hell of a put down, and as I say, everyone was giggling. Sometimes he would have a go at people, and I thought it was a bit unfair. Like the first time I ever met him, because I came up to Manchester in '95, and we had a Manchester correspondent, and I was kind of Yorkshire and Blackburn and all the other clubs. I was sort of junior member of a 2-man team in the Manchester office. But on one particular occasion, the Manchester correspondent wasn't around, and I had to go down and do Fergie. And he was an Express reader. And at the time, we had a chief sports writer who had the same surname as me, James Lawton, who's terrific. He's passed away sadly now, but absolutely wonderful writer. And a lot of people used to think that it was a classic case of nepotism, was my dad, right? And absolutely no relation, just had the same name. And first time I ever met Alex, I went down, and again, being young, I was 25 and quite scary. But I went up to him and I said, "Oh, hello, Alex. I'm the new guy at the Express." And he said to me, and I didn't know that he had a problem with Jim at the time. He said to me, "Are you related to that tramp?" So I was like, I've absolutely no idea what you're talking about. And then the penny dropped, because Jim, while he wrote beautifully, had wonderful writing style, he was a little, could look a bit dishevelled at times, let's just say.
Yeah.
He had that kind of eccentricity about him that meant that, he never looked like he'd ironed the shirt or whatever. Probably the way I look today, to be fair, but I've been stuck at my desk for 2 days. But no, he said, "Are you related to that tramp?" And I was like, hey. And then I thought, well, no, he's talking about Jim. And I was like, "Oh, no, I'm not, no." And he's like, "Oh, right." So I then sat down and I was thinking, what if I had been related to that tramp?
Yeah, he's my dad, actually.
What if that was my father? Yeah. How was I supposed to respond to that? Like, is that fighting talk? I don't know. Yeah. I'm not saying, I'm not a fighter. I'm very much a non-violent person. But no. I mean, it would have been pretty provocative and confrontational if that had been my father. And the fact of the matter is, he clearly thought he was.
Yeah.
And again, it was a way of trying to put me on the back foot, because he would always say to the older guys that he was always very untrusting of the younger guys. And he would occasionally accuse us of trying to make a name on the back of him and all this kind of stuff, making a name for ourselves on the back of him. And it's true, to an extent, we were getting great projection as young reporters, because we were writing about the most talked about, written about, successful team in the country.
Brilliant. I mean, unfortunately, we're still the most talked about, the most written about, but not the most successful team in the country anymore. So if we can just get that back, then maybe it'll be a good time to be a Manchester United fan. Thank you so much.
I'm sure it'll happen again. I'm sure they'll be back.
I hope so. Thank you very much, Matt, for coming on. That was brilliant. Great to chat about, obviously, what's going on at the minute, but those old stories as well, just fantastic. Thank you for coming on. This has been a one-on-one interview with Matt Lawton from The Times. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and we'll see you in a bit.